Welcome back to Flashpoint. Right now, it's anybody's guess who will take the Tar Heel state in this year's presidential election. North Carolina, a perennial purple state. In Western Carolina professor Chris Cooper's book, he details the history of North Carolina as a battleground state and why this year is no different. He joins us now. Professor, thanks for coming on Flashpoint. Good to see you again.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
What can we glean, if anything, from the early voting numbers we've seen so far? Are they a reliable indicator of anything beyond some idea of turnout? Is there something you can see there or not?
I think there are things we can see, but I think they do not give us very good tea leaves to say who's going to win, right? That's what everybody wants to know. What does this tell us about who's going to win the election? And I would say really nothing, right? This would be like showing up to a baseball game, carrying an umbrella and thinking you're going to hit a home run. It's just the wrong tool for the job, right? So what do they tell us? Right now, they're telling us that turnout looks pretty good, probably a little bit less than 2020 as we would expect. I think the other thing it's telling us is that this pattern we thought we knew in North Carolina politics, which was Democrats vote early, Republicans vote on election day. That pattern appears to be turned on its head this year. It's actually the Republican Party who's done a slightly better job turning out their voters for early voting. The $10,000 question is whether that means that they're mobilizing their voters better, whether it just means that they're getting people to vote early better than they used to. And we just are not going to know that until the other side of the equation is filled. And that's going to be, unfortunately, for those of us who want to predict after Election Day.
That's right. And another thing people like to cite when they're predicting things are the polls, which they have been problematic in recent years as well. I think they had a really good run for decades, and I feel like in the last 8 or 9 years, they've been all wonky. How confident are you in the polling? For example, I know the New York Times poll this week said the presidential race here in North Carolina is 48-48, right down the middle. Do you think come Election Day, the tally is going to reflect that race is this tight here, or do you think there could very well be a much bigger gap by that point?
It could very well be a much bigger gap, right? I mean, what we're doing is we're saying within this margin of error, so, 3 percentage points or so, we think we're going to be right 95% of the time. Nobody wants to hear that, right? I get those details are boring, but they matter. I mean, what the polls tell me is there's 7 states that are going to decide the next president of the United States. North Carolina is one of them. It's going to be close. How close, I think we'll find out.
Next Tuesday at midnight, that we actually have a decisive winner. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody might challenge it or something like that,
Sure.
but that it will be a fairly clear-cut thing.
I think it's possible, right? I mean, we have 7 states, again, that are going to matter. Those 7 states could be divided. It could be that all 7 states go to Harris. Could be all 7 states go to Trump. I mean, they're all a coin toss away. And so it's very possible that the coin, a few of those coin tosses go in the same direction. It looks pretty clean. It's also possible we could be, having this conversation once again in early December.
Yeah. In your book, you talked about something that we've talked about here. And I talked about it a few weeks ago on a panel, and I don't feel like enough people are talking about it, but I know it's important, is that our increasing obsession with national politics, not just that, but at the expense of state issues. What does that mean? What impact does that have on our politics?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. In some ways, that's the reason I wrote the book, was to try to do a very small part to help refocus our attention where it matters, right? So I think that we'd be a lot better off if few of us knew who Madison Cawthorn was and more of us knew who Tim Moore is, or who Phil Berger is, right? These powerful members of the North Carolina General Assembly. I mean, the reality is, since at least 2010, and arguably before, power has gone from the federal government to the states, right? If you care about abortion, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, doesn't matter. The states are where it matters. If you care about death penalty, right, the states are where it matters. If you care about Medicaid expansion, the states are what matters, right? If you care about higher education, K through 12 education, the list goes on. The real action is at the state level. And the problem is that fewer than half the people in this state can even tell you who their state legislators are. And so we have a real democratic dilemma on our hands, to where the offices that matter the most are the ones we know the least about.
Another big trend we've seen in recent years is the trend in unaffiliated voters here in North Carolina. It's growing by the year. More and more people registered as unaffiliated. What does that mean when all of our candidates are still very partisan, Democrat or Republican, especially when you start talking about 10 or 20 years down the line?
I think that is such a great point, right? Unaffiliated is the largest category of registered voters in the state of North Carolina. So the voters are trying to signal something, right? We talk about what exactly they're trying to signal, but they're saying, hey, I want, at least in some ways, out of this system. But to win, you pretty much have to be a member of one of the two major parties. Let's think about Tricia Cotham, right? So sort of local to Charlotte, or at least to Mecklenburg County. When she decided to party switch, she didn't say, I'm going to go from the Democratic Party to unaffiliated, right? She's way too smart for that. She said, I can go from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, because she knew that if she went unaffiliated, it's game over, right? The power is in the parties. And so the problem we've got is the voters are increasingly unaffiliated, right? Young people increasingly unaffiliated. You have to be a member of one of the two major parties to win. And so my real fear for democracy in North Carolina is that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when the partisans are gone, when unaffiliated is the vast, vast, vast majority of our state, we're not going to have folks left to run for office, right? We're not going to have folks left to do the work of political parties, be precinct chairs and precinct captains, whether you're Democrat or Republican, right? Parties drive much of what is good in some ways about American politics, and by opting into none of the above, we may not have people left to do the work of politics.
That's an important topic. I don't know what anybody else is talking about that I think I could talk to you about for an entire episode of Flashpoint, because it's just not something that I even think about, but deserves more attention than this 1 or 2 minutes we're giving it. Finally, I want to talk to you about, you've got some fair weather purple states out there like Ohio or Florida. Do you think North Carolina is permanently purple?
Yeah, so I would never use the word permanently in American politics, right? And we used to think you're permanent, like the South is overwhelmingly Democratic. Clearly, we've turned that up on its head, right? But I do think we're going to be purple, at least for the foreseeable future, likely for the amount of time where I'm every now and again commenting on North Carolina politics, right? It just looks like, if you think about the South has gone from overwhelmingly Democratic to overwhelmingly Republican, and then a couple of states like Virginia have come back, maybe Georgia to some degree. North Carolina was never as Democratic as its neighbors before, and it's not as Republican as its neighbors now. So if you think about a clock, it's almost like the South went from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. We've been hanging out at 3:30 for the better part of 3 decades. And I think we're going to stay there for the foreseeable future.
So our neighbors changed. We didn't necessarily change all that much. We just sort of teeter back and forth. All right, Professor Cooper, thanks so much. Happy election season. Hope Tuesday goes well for you. I know you'll be watching it closely.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, more Flashpoint after this. Up next, right here on Flashpoint, we break down the numbers behind North Carolina's elections and how they could impact this year's races.